Hey everyone, it's Shilpi. Welcome back to the People Over Plastic podcast. I can't believe it. We've reached the season finale of Democracy and Dissent. I just want to start by saying how grateful I am that you've tuned in, episode after episode. Your support and engagement means the world, and we wouldn't be here without you. This season, we've explored 3 pillars of democracy: participation, protections, and protest. Each of these is essential in the fight for environmental justice. And today, we're closing out with something very special. We're bringing you stories from our in-person story salon at New York City Climate Week. These stories remind us that dissent isn't just important, it's sacred. It's how we challenge unjust systems and demand real change. First up, we have Thalia Cachimuel from NDN Collective, an Indigenous-led organization dedicated to building Indigenous power. Next, we'll hear from Kizzy Charles-Guzman, the CEO of the Center for Environmental Health. Kizzy has spent over 18 years protecting communities from toxic chemicals and leading efforts that center public health and racial equity. And finally, Chris Tandanzo, former statewide organizer for the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. I'm so excited for you to hear the energy from this live event, which was hosted by Counterstream's very own executive director. He's Houston-based community strategist Michael McKenzie, a storyteller and environmental justice leader in his own right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. It's great to see all of these beautiful faces for our story salon in New York City for New York City Climate Week. So guys, give yourselves a hand for showing up. My name is Michael McKenzie, and I would be remiss if I didn't tell a bit of my story. Born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. You all may hear a lot about Cancer Alley, but I grew up across from Exxon Chemical Plant. I thought it was normal, but it wasn't normal. I thought that everyone's grandparents died from cancer, and that is not reality. But I also know that a part of my story is a story of resilience, as well as a story of abundance because of who raised me and the strength that they passed down to me. So I am the executive director of Counterstream Media, and we are here because our stories matter. Our narratives and stories are drivers of change. Historically, the story around Land of the Free and Home of the Brave omitted intersectional stories of life, liberty, and happiness of people sans genocide, slavery, extraction, and capitalism over human dignity. But because of you, the story is being rewritten. You are here because you know that a just transition of water, land, air, and human dignity does not happen without stories. So, Thalia, Kizzy, Chris, thank you. And thank each of you for being here to hear these stories and bringing your stories. So I kept envisioning the past, and I also envision the future. What's your vision for a thriving democracy, Thalia?
Imanaja Mashikunan, Yukashutimi Thalia Yarina, Ecuador, Otavalo, Jactamanda, Yupaichani. Hi everyone, my name is Thalia. I use she, her pronouns. This is an interesting question, right? Because we're in such a unique moment thinking about what democracy means. And I've been seeing a lot circulating online and conversations about protecting democracy. We need to protect democracy. But does the democracy that we have right now function enough for us to protect it? I think about how our tax dollars are being sent to literally desecrate an entire community in Gaza. I think about the democracy that we live in right now that isn't pushing the nail on really thinking about Black reparations in practice and in real time. And the democracy that we currently have in place right now, I don't think they're ready for those conversations. I think the people in this room are ready for those conversations, which makes me feel very excited. Our team just got back from 5 days in Washington, D.C., lobbying for our policy and priority points. And it's really hard to think about the history of these institutions that have been in place for so long. and the pain and harm that has been caused by these institutions, by this democracy, right? This quote, democracy. But I think if we really do want to move forward in getting to a place where we can have conversations about what it means to have a thriving democracy, land back and Black reparations are at the top of that.
A healthy community is the only way that we get to a thriving democracy, a thriving economy, and a strong climate and environmental movement. So healthy bodies, our regulators taking it very seriously, that their job is to protect us and to keep toxic chemicals out of our food, our water, our soil, our air, the consumer products that we use every day. Without healthy bodies, we cannot get to a strong democracy.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Chris Tandanzo. I use they, them pronouns. As somebody that has been on the ground working with folks, the future of democracy has to involve the people that the democracy is meant to serve. And as Thalia mentioned, like, who built the democracy that we have right now and who is that democracy serving? It's not the peoples that I work with, for sure. Like, it's not really helping Black and brown communities get clean air or clean water in our spaces. Instead, it's allowing facilities and industry to put their industries in their neighborhoods. And that's still considered a democracy in their eyes. So to me, that has to shift in a complete way so that the people are centered.
Why does the story of marginalized people matter? Why should people know that Black people are buried under Wall Street?
Thank you for this question. It makes me think about the story of Leonard Peltier. Leonard Peltier is the longest serving Indigenous political prisoner in United States history. And I think that the power of telling Leonard's story has been able to bring forth a conversation about truth and reconciliation. And just for a little context, Leonard turned 80 years old on September 12th, and he's been wrongfully in prison for 49 years. Next year will be 50. And when I was cleaning out my childhood home, I found a letter from this campaign that I was working on where I was sending out letters for people to sign. And it says, "Free Leonard Peltier now, 40 years is enough." So this was almost 10 years ago. This postcard is addressed to President Obama, right? And the symbolism behind this postcard to me was a symbol of so many generations of movement leaders and Indigenous people and allies who have fought for Leonard's freedom for almost 50 years. And the reason that the storytelling is so important is because without that, we become invisible. I've had conversations with people that genuinely are like, wait, Indigenous people are still alive? And I'm like, yeah, they are, right? Like, the stories that we tell about our communities, about our peoples, about our leaders are so essential so that they're centered in conversations, so that those stories are then brought to places where decisions are being made for us, right? Like in Washington, D.C. There are people that are making choices for us, whether that's in philanthropy, whether that's in government, and they're making choices about us without us. And I want to call that into this Climate Week too. Every single panel that is taking place during Climate Week should have an Indigenous person on it. There should be no conversation about whether or not our voices need to be incorporated, because Indigenous peoples protect 80% of the world's global biodiversity. And all of these funder conversations are closed-door conversations without people from our community, and they're making choices about us. And when we're able to bring forth that narrative in our stories, we reclaim that power back.
Well, +1, 2, and 3 to everything that Thalia has said. And I will also offer that ultimately, as impacted communities, our stories, we also have to bring those in as those decisions are being made, right? So if we allow decision makers to make decisions on our behalf without us in the room and without us holding the pen, then they're going to miss the stories that matter. They're going to miss the nuance And I think that having spent 17 years in New York City government, where everybody always said, the government, it's the government's fault. Yes, and we needed more people like me, coming from the kind of neighborhood that I came from, having had the lived experience that I had, having had the environmental health impacts that affected my community, in order to then better inform the legislation, the policy, the partnerships, and all of that that needed to happen in New York City. And I think that ultimately, even within the nonprofit sphere, I'm tired. I'm tired of seeing Black and brown faces in the brochures. I am tired of when the decision that matters, when the thing that costs money, when the unpopular policy is being discussed, even those of us fighting for the planet, fighting for climate, fighting for environmental health, even in those spaces, when those spaces are primarily white, when those spaces are not diverse economically, when those spaces are not diverse geographically, we continue to actually perpetuate violence on the most impacted communities. And I have been there. I have been in those nonprofits where I was the token Black girl, where I was the token Latina. I'm tired. So we want these stories, because ultimately that is how we actually bring justice to our communities, right? Like lived experience, not just at the table.
And so I think it's really important for us to reclaim our stories and make sure that those stories are told by us. There is a lot of things that are attached to narrative and to the storytelling, such as funding. And that is critical for environmental and climate justice organizations, grassroots groups that don't have a lot of infrastructure to do the work that they do in, and sometimes don't have enough capacity to even tell their own stories. But storytelling is also organizing. And there's this joke going on in Jersey where we say that we organize by el chisme, like gossiping. And that's, I'm thank you all, you're all that, I see you, you see me.
Hey all, I wanted to take a quick second to tell you about Peace and Riot. It's our free environmental justice zine with a pop culture spin. It's packed with interviews, essays, photos, and art, covering all the issues you care about, from food sovereignty to indigenous activism, and of course the fight against plastic pollution. Head over to counterstream.org and read it now.
Yeah, thank you. I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about why is dissent important? Because being Generation X, we were taught, you go to school, say please and thank you. You don't steal. You do the right thing. You work 3 times harder. Why is dissent important? What place does dissent have to achieve justice?
The first thing that really popped to mind to me is dissent is sacred, right? Dissent, in my opinion, when we embody dissent in the ways that make sure that we're uplifting our community, is really like our ancestors coming to protect us and giving us the voice to stand up when things are challenging and feel really hard. I think one of the most important parts about dissent is that it brings to light the systems of oppression and harm that have been caused to our communities for centuries, while also creating tangible and creative solutions towards our liberation. Dissent is central to who we are as Indigenous peoples. I always joke, my birthday is November 25th. It always falls on Thanksgiving, and I hate Thanksgiving. I've always hated Thanksgiving. My family, I grew up attending the National Day of Mourning in Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts. And my dad used to say, you were born into resistance. Because I would I hate my birthday. It's always this Thanksgiving BS everywhere at school. You're reading these these stories that perpetuate so many false stereotypes and false history. But that reframing of you were born into resistance, I think is like this call from our ancestors that we're all born into resistance, right? And we have a responsibility to our communities, to ourselves, to our ancestors, to make sure that we are speaking out in moments of injustice. And, our team got here on Friday. We've been running to event after event after event. And this is the first time I've heard the word genocide, right? Like there is a full genocide happening right now in Gaza. And if we ignore the interconnectedness of climate justice and genocide, then we're not doing the work towards our liberation. We have to be uplifting our relatives in Gaza the same ways that we talk about, these, solutions are impacting this community and that community. And it also makes me think about land back, right? Land back as a climate solution. And you can't fight towards land back without dissent. You'll get pushback. So dissent, to me, honestly, is everything. I talked about Leonard. I was 2 years old at Free Leonard Peltier rallies, right? That dissent, it can start from the womb to, into adulthood. But it's our responsibility as human beings, right? No one's going to make you do anything. You have to hold yourself accountable to doing that work. You have to be the one to show up in the streets and show up for your comrades and show up for your community, because no one's going to do that work for you.
The great poet Nas, he had this line, and this line stuck with me. He said, "You call it Thanksgiving, I call your holiday Hell Day, because I'm from poverty neglected by the wealthy." So, growing up across from a billion-dollar corporation, there's some Thanksgivings we had to scrap. Like, it wasn't this big turkey and folks sitting around. There were some family members who were in jail. There were some family members who were struggling, and depending on the year, we could have been struggling. So we may not have had a full turkey. And so you mentioning Thanksgiving and us being in New York, I had to bring in the Queensbridge legend, Dissent, Kizzy, Dissent.
Dissent is in our DNA, I think, as impacted communities, as communities of colonized, enslaved, historically looted people. My parents would say that I was dissenting from a very young age. I immigrated to Brooklyn as a young teen, and I went to public schools at a time that it wasn't cool or safe to live in Brooklyn. And ultimately, the racial disparities in environmental quality, in health outcomes, in educational achievement, in economic opportunity was so staggering. All of that was staggering, neighborhood to neighborhood, right? So I think that at a very young age, I was able to see, I was volunteering. I was the unpaid intern at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. And I got to see what it was like to have these beautifully manicured, beautifully funded environmental resource be gated, be exclusive. And Prospect Park was just a few blocks away. And again, it says the early 90s, there wasn't a lot of love going into that park. There wasn't a lot of funding going into that park. So I got to think a lot about the fact that the resource that was freely available to my neighbors, the place where they could have sought respite, was actually in a condition that forced them to stay indoors, stay home, which ironically then exacerbated their health conditions, right? And then I eventually got to college, and my parents are like, so chemistry, right? And so I end up in geology, and they can accept that because they're thinking, well, look how that turned out. I ended up very early on in environmental justice work. I was volunteering at a nonprofit in Harlem, and I was part of a New York State study that was a biomonitoring study. It basically was looking at our blood and urine samples and testing them for 6 chemicals of concern. And I'm a young person at this time, and I was, again, flabbergasted that just going about my very low footprint life, okay, just minding my own business, I had tested positive for these chemicals in my body. I have been working on environmental health ever since. I think ultimately I always think about what is it that just by virtue of drinking water, the most sacred of all rights, breathing air, right? Just going about your life, touching your soil, we are absorbing these chemicals that are just there because some people decided that we could live with them. And so dissent has to be part of that, right? I do not consent to having an environment where I have to worry. I do not consent to go into a store and having to stand like a fool, wasting my time in front of a shelf, trying to figure out which of these fashion products, which of these food items have lead in them, cadmium, arsenic, PFAS, right? And this is why I think the work at CH is just so critically important. Ultimately, for us, dissent means we're going to give you hell. We're going to sue you. We're going to educate. We're going to organize. We're going to test the products. We're going to hire the most amazing scientists to literally go to Ross, go to Burlington, get those wallets, the belts, all the things that you bring home unaware. And then your kids touch them and put them in their mouth. And then they have elevated lead blood levels. What? Like, that is unacceptable. So I am protesting. I am dissenting. And that is what this movement ought to be about. Really standing up and keeping accountable these corporations that for profit are poisoning whole communities, but also just at the most individual level. There is no reason why affordability has to come at the expense of our health. That is unacceptable. And so, yeah, we dissent every day in order to make sure we have healthy bodies.
I think dissent is how we get progress and justice. In Jersey, we are really fighting against the incinerators. We have 3 of them. By the way, most of New York City's trash goes to Newark. So if you're throwing something out in the trash today, just know that it's being burned at an incinerator and environmental justice community across the river. And we're breathing that air. And if they had not taken a stand against the multiple proposals of incinerators that were coming to Jersey, like, it wasn't just going to be like one, it was like 5 or 6 that were going to be proposed, and the people fought against them. They took a stand, and that fight continues to this day because we still have 3 incinerators and we're still fighting against Covanta. But I think our push has gone so much, and I think the push nationally against Covanta has gone so much that they now rebrand it. They're now called Reworld. So if y'all, hear the word Reworld, it's Covanta. They're still messed up. They're still burning trash. They're still poisoning communities. It's not any different. It's just greenwashing at its finest.
What are you hopeful for? I'm a father, a 14-year-old and a 20-year-old, and those some really good guys. They motivate me every day to try to make this world a better place. And it's sort of funny seeing them do some of the same shit I've done when I was 14. I'm like, that's not gonna work, Chad. I tried it. But they give me so much hope knowing that I broke a cycle that was exacerbated by Exxon and was exacerbated by Reaganomics and was exacerbated by infant mortality in Louisiana. I'm named after a cousin who died. So my mom said, well, my sister's baby died. She decided to name me after him. I was like, cool, thanks for telling me. But when you look deeper, that was due to the environment. And so these stories and these stories that I just talked about give me hope. What gives you hope, Kizzy?
If I didn't consume copious amounts of hope every single day, trying to find beauty on everything around us, these conversations, my sister now, right? That tree that was planted because of our efforts to redress years of its investment in urban canopy in formerly redline neighborhoods. Again, Prospect Park, the places that looked a certain way just a few years ago and now are vibrant and very different. All of that gives me hope. It gives me hope that we just reached a historic agreement with 30 clothing brands, including Hanes and Asics, so that they can remove toxic chemicals from your regular clothes, because you should not be at the store and be worried about whether there's BPA or PFAS or some other chemical that's trying to kill you in your socks or your sports bra, okay? That gives me hope that we can give so much of our lives, so much of our health, to be honest, so much of our stress and our mental capacity to the movement, but we do see these wins. And you also see it in the way that, frankly, the planet keeps on, right? That plant is growing, that tree is budding, right? Despite our best efforts, the planet is trying to right itself in some ways. That tree keeps growing. We have got to find joy and hope and love, and know that, frankly, the only reason why we do justice work and environmental health work and climate justice work is out of love. It is the biggest expression of our love for humanity is the work that we do every day.
The mantra that I abide by in my work, I refer to it as the eagle and the condor prophecy, which is a prophecy that brings indigenous peoples together from the north and the south through collective solidarity, regardless of the borders that have been intentionally drawn between us, right? I'm a child of the diaspora. I live majority off territory. My territory is in Otavalo, Ecuador. And I feel responsibility wherever I go to the peoples of the land that I have the privilege of residing on. And that is what draws me to this sacred work with NDN. But it's really all about community, right? And, you know, I'm just uplifting some of my sister's points here about, despite government attacks, despite political figures not believing in our livelihood, despite schools trying to ban student voices, like, we still rise. We're still rooted in dissent. And to me, to know that our ancestors went through all this pain, that they went through all this trauma, and yet we're still here, that gives me hope every day, right? Like, we are the embodiment of so many dreams. And I know that what we're doing now for the next 7 generations, we're cultivating those same dreams for our future descendants. And that gives me hope. So, you know, we talk about this at NDN, we say, like, in our lifetime, right? Like, we hear this phrase in the fight for Gaza, but we also have to be comfortable in knowing that we might not see these things in our lifetime. But we know that we're cultivating and creating that space for our future descendants to see that in their lifetime. And that gives me hope. I still have hope because of the people that I'm surrounded with and my community. That gives me that feeling of knowing that what I'm doing will go beyond the impact that we make on this earth right now.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
For me, what gives me hope is Gen Z. Shout out to the Gen Zers in this space. I have had the privilege and honor to work with a lot of Gen Zs, and both within my organization, but also in, like, movement spaces. And I am impressed, amazed every day when they literally choose to not take on the things that a lot of other generations, my generation included, have decided that it was okay for us to deal with that. You know, they're literally saying, no more, that's it. Like, y'all, like, could have been, this is like, y'all had your chance and this is just it. And, like, we're not allowing this to continue any further. And that kind of resistance and stronghold and just righteousness to really stand on their ground about that and not waver to any of the pressures from all the generations, that is so powerful to me and so hopeful, because it's showing me that another world is truly possible, because we're seeing another generation behaving differently already. Like Thalia was mentioning, like, I feel like the work that we do today, I've already accepted that I'm not going to see the fruits of my labor happening in my lifetime, and I'm totally okay with that, because I have done the work to make sure that there is spaces for youth and younger folks to take on my role and continue to do my work. I mean, hopefully, like, they don't have to do with my work in the future, because it would be better if, like, this work didn't have to exist. But, you know, like, we do support folks to make sure that they are taking on the torch from us, and they're eager to take the torch. And that's what's really hopeful to me, like, the eagerness and the energy that they have to really just be like, yeah, like, you can't do that, you're tired, I got you. And I'm like, oh, okay, you know more than I do at this point. And that to me is also really important, because, like, it's showing me that they're learning, they're taking on, like, the task of literally saving and fixing this planet. And we have, all generations, we have such a pivotal and responsibility into making sure that we create this space and we support these generations into making sure for them to continue this path. And I think if we have the ability to show that and be that support to them, then the more hope that we'll have that there is a different future ahead.
We could have this conversation all night, but I felt it was important for us to end on hope. And with that, I'd like to pass the mic to Chris.
This is dedicated to the Lenape people, their ancestors, current and future generations, to the ancestors of the jungles and mountains of Abya Yala, to the ancestors from the west to the east, to the north, to the south of Turtle Island, to our non-human ancestors, to Pachamama, to our peoples, who continue to hold us dearly through turbulent times. To y'all I offer these words. There I was in Lenape lands, looking up the moon, brilliant and adorned, a guiding light smiling my path. I look at the shining stars, crystals in the night sky. My ancestors used to look up to them, asking for guidance in their paths. Could I ask for guidance too? I whispered to the skies. As I stared at the light of the full moon, I felt warmth, joy, a sudden flame of love. Were the ancestors listening? I was wrapped in a vortex of emotions. Protect the sacred, I heard. My soul and mind traveled back to Ecuador, to Catacocha, to my ancestral lands. I'm so far away from home, said my grief. But quickly, love reminded me, this land, your ancestors, your home, we all travel within your soul, everywhere you go. Under the moon, I thought back to my history, my ancestry. The flame of love stood beside pain and sorrow, sadness from the loss of my ancestral culture, erased by genocide and colonial violence. It was the beginning of the climate crisis. The genetics in my body start to remember the loss of my kin. I start to feel the grief, sharing teardrops with the sky, turn to more crystals for the night, adding more light in my path. Ironically, a moment of bliss finds me. I think back to the moment that I decided to follow this path, to follow the call from the land. The moment I decided to stop letting fear be a fraction of my equations, I think back to Standing Rock, I think back to BLM, to the uprisings. It wasn't a dream, it was a reality of resistance against settler colonial violence, against the true color of whiteness, against the change of capitalist empires. It was the love of intersectional solidarity, BIPOC resistance, a moment of clarity, a spark that has expanded to all corners of the globe, igniting a fire that carried a message of justice and joy, shedding away old patterns, making space for new ways of living, a spark of hope that has existed within me and us all, simply waiting to be awoken, to rebirth, to experience a revival of the human soul. A cold breeze swung by. It brought me back to the moonlight. It was gentle, soft, a message of love from Andean winds. The land, she remembers you, the cold breeze said. But my heart, it didn't feel cold. It felt warmth. Sudden strength began to flow within me. My spirit was shining, my brown is glowing. I realized then to stand here today with its trans and queer indigenous face, it's proof that colonialism failed to erase us. It's proof that I'm embodied resistance to extractive, cis, heteropatriarchal, settler, colonial, capitalist empires, that I'm a descendant of warriors and survivors put in this world to thrive, carrying centuries of spiritual strength, resilience, and wisdom, leading rows of justice in the sky. I realize that I'm a story that expands from Abya Yala to Turtle Island and across the oceans and the stars. I realize that I'm in a path supported by ancestral love and light, unconditional and pure. A love rooted in the pride for the color of my skin and the shape of my nose. I love reminding me that my trans and queer ancestors, they didn't pray for me to be a savior of the world. They prayed for me to simply exist and come into existence in this world, to embody resistance to systems that wish to see us no more. I realize this is my medicine in climate chaos, to live joyfully, authentic, and free. Thank you.
As we close out this season, I've been thinking about the conversations we've had about democracy and dissent, and one thing is clear. The democracy we were promised, well, we're still far from it. Not when Black, Indigenous, and communities of color are still fighting for basic protections. Not when protest is being criminalized, and certainly not when clean air, water, and land remain privileges instead of rights. Dissent is an act of hope. It's the belief in a better world and the demand to make it real. The stories we've shared this season of resilience, of creativity, and defiance show that real change comes when we refuse to accept the status quo and fight for a democracy where all voices are heard. So I'll leave you with this. What's your vision of a thriving democracy? And more importantly, how far are you willing to go to make it happen? That's a wrap on Season 5, but we'll be back soon. Subscribe and follow us to be the first to know when the next season drops. And don't forget to check out more stories at counterstream.org. A big thank you to all of my guests and to the team that makes this podcast possible. BZ at Studio 132 in Oakland, where most of the season was recorded. Our producers Mindy Raymaker and Dennis Maxwell. Our project manager, Vincent Ford, and our season artwork designer, Lee No Heisig. I'm your host, Shilpi Chhotray. Until next time.